Welcome, everyone, back to another episode of Frank Finance, where you can get your honest financial information and your questions answered. Today's discussion is really going to be talking about a key thing that we need to also be paying attention to in the financial world as we move forward. That is, how is our U.S. debt continuing to grow at the rate it is, and how are we able to maintain lifestyle as we are right now? This will be a multi-series review that I'm going to put together where we're going to talk today about just understanding the US debt, understanding our US budget, and some key takeaways that we need to think about. If you enjoy this video, please like, subscribe, and comment below. We'll get right to it. Alright, so let's talk about the US debt. So what you can see here on the right now is the US debt, how it's grown over the last 20 years. We've gone from nearly $5.7 trillion to almost $28 trillion in debt. That means over the last 20 years, we've grown nearly 8.2% on the compound adjusted growth rate, and over the last 12 years, it's grown at about 9.1% per year. So you can see it's continuing to get worse. Obviously, we all know what happened last year, and this is a huge reason for that growth. Now, how do we think about GDP? GDP has gone from $9.4 trillion to almost $22 trillion, which has grown at a rate of 4.2% over the last 20 years, and a rate of about 3.8% over the last 12. Obviously, what we've experienced in 2020 was a huge hit, and we have remained relatively flat in GDP over the last 3 years. Now, why is this all important? Well, one of the ratios that we look at is debt to GDP. This is a common way to look at and understand, are we going to be able to pay our bills, because GDP forms revenue and so forth for the government. And so a ratio today have gone from 61% to nearly 130%, which means right now we're at an unsustainable path, and it is continuing to rise. If this continues to rise, good countries to look at that have downstream impacts that we're about to be experiencing if we continue at the path we're going would be a country like Japan or Venezuela. Those type of countries have had huge economic downturns or hyperinflation and things of that nature that just result as basically where we're going down. And one more thing to think about is, who do we owe this debt to? Well, basically about 40% of that debt is foreign investors, and the biggest foreign investors that are out there right now are Japan, China, UK. After that, it continues to reduce dramatically on how much each foreign country has invested in our debt. The remaining portion is going to be public debt. And I'll go into that into another video about what does that all mean. All right, next on the list is talking about the budget items. So the US budget from 2000 was about 1.8 trillion and went up to nearly 4.7 trillion is where we sit today. As we think of the overall 20-year CAGR, that is 4.9% growth on a 20-year and 4.2% on the 12-year. So you could see we're starting to slow down in how much more we're spending, but one of the kickers here is if we think of revenues or receipts, it's gone from 1.7 trillion to nearly 3.6 trillion. That is a 3.8% growth on a 20-year CAGR and a 2.7% growth on a 12-year. So you can see our revenues or receipts have continued to drop off a cliff, basically, which is why you see in our current year basically a massive deficit. So in 2000, we were pretty close to breaking even here from the plan, and all of the information you're seeing here in front of you, I'll leave the link below to the place where you can go research the by-year budget tables that are out there. And so one thing that's really important to look at is what's really driving our increases. So in 2020, about Medicare, Social Security, and Defense was basically a 20-20-20 split. You can see in the middle there the amount of our budget and where it was spent. And then as you think about where are we at today, basically where's 2021 set to be? Almost 30% set to be on Medicare and Medicaid. The costs are growing out of control, and this isn't even including a concept of Medicare for all. This doesn't include Medicare Advantage. This doesn't include anything of those sorts. This is just purely where it sits today for a budget standpoint. Mind you, Medicaid has increased as a result of everything that occurred in 2020 that is going to continue. If people lose their jobs, they're going to go on Medicaid. If people are over 65, they're going to be on Medicare first. Now, Social Security is basically the same percent as it was of our budget from 2000. And we're seeing that our defense is actually decreasing, which makes sense as well. One thing that we can see on the whole debt increases is that the interest on the debt has gone from merely 13% of our overall budget to now 8% of our budget. The thing that we don't see, though, is that the 20-year CAGR is 2.8%, or the last 12-year is 4.1%. The growth and how fast the interest on our debt is going up is increasing, but it is relatively shrinking on our overall budgetary spend. So if we're able to get our revenues back in place to cover off on our budgets, you can see where you always hear Janet Yellen, the Treasury lead now, basically saying now is our time to spend. Interest rates are low, time is to spend now. Where if interest rates rise, you're going to see this bucket on our budget significantly go up for our governmental spend that is required. I do think it's worth us talking about some key takeaways now at this point as we walk forward here, and some things to think about. So, some issues at hand. Right now, there is no limit on the debt ceiling basically until July 31st of 2021. Meaning that in the middle of this year, everyone talks about the stock market crash and everything that can occur. Well, if interest rates come out higher than they are today, if taxation increases, if you take and remove capital gains or 1031 exchanges, there are never-ending things that could one by one impact how people that are wealthy spend their money or invest their money. And so one thing to be watching for as we go forward is basically when that debt ceiling comes back into play, how does the government reflect on that? How does the taxations that are about to potentially come out, do we take our corporate tax rates back up to the normal rates? Do we tax higher on the wealthy? Do we increase taxation on Social Security or Medicare so that it's funded for our youth today when they retire? As you can see right now, this is why these things are hot topics right now. If we're seeing trend in Social Security and Medicare at 5.3 and 7.1%, but yet inflation on salaries are only 2%, you're never going to be able to recover those costs, which is the big issue here, is it will eventually run dry. So the only way for them to cover off on those costs is we would basically have to increase taxes on Social Security, increase taxes on Medicare, and if we want to cover off on all those other project pools that are out there, we would also have to increase taxes on basically our federal income tax. That's the only options that are out there for us to get this back in track. So either it's going to happen this decade or next decade, but the next 20 years, it's something that we have to watch for. Hopefully you found this information insightful as I have by the research I've done on this topic. I will continue to make more videos as stated intro, and until next time, I hope you have a great rest of your day. Bye now.